Welcome to Columbros, the podcast where bros talk about Columbo. This is only possible because of our patrons. Mike, we got over 300 patrons on patreon.com/GameMess. If you are listening to this in the month of August, likely you are one of those Patreon supporters. If you're listening to it later, please consider supporting us on patreon.com. It makes efforts like this possible.
Patreon.com/GameMess. Thank you.
That's patreon.com/GameMess. Yes, once again, thank you. We just recorded an episode of Game Mess Decides. This is what we're going to record these like once a month after that stuff. We're going to watch, I think, in order, I think is what we were planning to do, Mike. I guess you said a mission statement. Do you have anything in mind about like what people should know about our efforts here?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's kind of what we want to do here. Jeff and I both kind of independently started watching Columbo, getting into it. I stumbled into it because a friend of mine and I were going through a list of like the top 100 best TV episodes ever, right? And this very episode we're about to talk about, Murder by the Book, was on there. So we watched that first, and we were watching some I Love Lucy episodes, a Mary Tyler Moore episode. That was all fun. We watched the Columbo. We were like, we kind of just want to watch Columbo. That was really good. So yeah, since then I've seen a ton of Columbo, and I'm happy to go back and watch them and see some of the ones I may have glossed over the first time. But how did you sort of stumble into the Columbo world? Yeah,
I think what happened was I think Gary Whitta, who is a film writer, an old games journalist, friend of like Kind of Funny and stuff like that. People probably aware of Gary. He helped write Rogue One. He was tweeting a while ago about how he wanted to get Mark Ruffalo to play the new Columbo.
That makes so much sense.
And I'm like, now I think that's a great idea. At the time, I was like, oh, okay, that's such a. And then like everybody just like kind of stuck with me. I'm like, why does Columbo seem so cool these days? Columbo seems to be coming back, and it's like this, like it's even more back now than it was then. And at some point in that, like the year following that, I'm like, how do I even watch Columbo? And I looked into it, and I think this is before Freevee. There was something called IMDb.TV, and that's what Freevee turned into. And you could watch shows on there, and it was all ad supported. And I watched a couple episodes of Columbo on there with ads, and now thankfully I can get it on the Peacock network.
It's very easy to watch on Peacock now, which is very nice.
So I went in there with that, and I very quickly discovered, which some of our listeners might not, they might not watch the show. They might just be listening to us. They just like us more than they like Peter Falk. That's a mistake, but yeah, I get it.
Fools.
If you haven't watched this, you need to understand that it's a mystery show. It is, but it is not a whodunit. It is a How Ketchum. A How Ketchum being, instead of
sounds like Ash Ketchum's like younger brother.
Exactly. It sounds like if there was like a really bad Native American stereotype version of Ash Ketchum.
Yeah, from Peter Pan. Ketchum.
Yes.
Disney's Peter Pan.
Exactly. Yeah. So instead of looking at or like being unaware of who the killer is and trying to piece that together as you watch, you know who the killer is because the first act of this, these made-for-TV movies, essentially, they are often about a 90-minute episode or 90 minutes with commercials.
1 hour 15 to like 190, depends, yeah.
Yes. It really would say you see what happens. You see the murder, and then the entire sort of tension is the game of cat and mouse between Peter Falk's character, Lieutenant Columbo, Lieutenant Detective Columbo, I think, and the murderer. And the big thing about the show is the murderer is almost always someone that deserves to get caught. A lot of times they have justifications for for murdering, but these are people who are affluent and have other means by which they could have solved their problems, but by saying no, I'm gonna go with murder, I'm gonna kill someone. Right. They definitely are like out of the realm of, oh no, something needs to happen to them, and then along comes Columbo.
Usually premeditated. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So usually white collar kind of stuff here.
Yep.
Exactly.
And Columbo's a force of nature. He comes in and he is just like this. He is this angel that's going to come down and punish them. A lot of these descriptions do come from Ogno's video that I watched. It's very good. He's a community member. He did a video. You should check that out. I'll probably put a link in the description. That's a good primer for this show if you want one. But yeah, we're not going to spend too much more time describing the general show. I think you probably get the idea now. We can hop into this episode unless there's anything else you want to say, Mike.
Couple of things. So we're doing what is kind of considered the first episode. There are a couple maybe pilots considered here. Prescription Murder, Ransom for a Dead Man. We aren't doing those yet. Maybe we'll go back to those.
I did start Prescription Murder. I got about halfway through, but I got too tired and had to go to bed. It's way better than I was expecting. It was it's surprisingly good.
And we're talking about the Game S community and all that stuff, but there's a lot of Columbo fans out there, which is this funny thing for an IP that again hasn't had like any kind of reboot like so many things.
Yeah.
But hopefully, I'm hoping that some people discover this just because of the love of Columbo. Welcome. I hope you enjoy this journey with us through the saga of Lieutenant Columbo. But Jeff, Murder by the Book, episode 1.
Murder by the Book. So we start off this episode with basically two men. One man is at his typewriter writing something. We quickly becomes clear he's writing a mystery novel. And another man coming to visit him. These, we find out quickly, are co-authors of a series of mystery novels, 15 books. They've worked on these things together. And one of them now wishes to pursue a solo career. The second writer was upset by this. We know this because of some incidental dialogue where they're talking about this. He apologizes for blowing his cork, as he said, but he's here, all smiles, bottle champagne, and he wants to apologize to his friend. The one man, Ken Franklin, is the one who's visiting. Jim, I think is
Jim Ferris is the other writer here. Yes, thank you to Columbo File. Boy, I'll send you this link, Jeff. Columbo File is an incredible website.
Fantastic. I should think I just found that right here. Fantastic.
On each episode here. And it's very evident right away, this opening scene, because this is an incredible camera shot of the one author and his car in the parking lot pulling into the office of Ken Franklin, and that typewriter kind of melodically, ominously going with this music. This episode is actually directed by Steven Spielberg, a young Steven Spielberg.
Yep.
Hasn't quite started his big movie career yet. He's a few years away from Jaws, and yet you can get that vibe immediately. This episode is directed so well. As much as I love all of Columbo, there is something about this that is maybe a bit more cinematic than your average episode easily.
Yeah, there's going to be some really good examples of that later on, like some Spielbergian effects of like how he portrays action and things like that. Some of that's like evident right away, where we get tight close-up shots of faces as these two men first see each other in this episode, and Ken Franklin does a prank, bro. I'm going to pull a prank on you. I got my gun, and I'm going to...
Hell of a prank!
Yes, I'm going to point my gun at you at the door, and I'm going to have an angry face. But Jim Ferris, he's a mystery novelist. He knows that that he's not really going to kill him, because why? Because he's not wearing gloves. His finger isn't on the trigger, and there was some other reason I don't remember. But
this scene's doing a couple things. Because one, it's a fake out for the audience. Like, oh yeah, well, I'm watching a murder mystery. He's just going to shoot him right here, whatever. But no, that's a fake out. But it also does establish that Jim's not seeing it coming. Yep. Jim honestly believes, like, oh no, Ken wouldn't do that. Ken wouldn't kill me. That'd be ridiculous.
Yep. And we're a little bit off kilter now, because oh no, they are getting along. But there's cracks in that facade pretty quickly. Ken Franklin is doing things slyly as Jim Ferris is busy or looking away. One thing includes leaving his lighter on on Jim's desk, and it's like, well, we don't know why he's doing that right away. But that's kind of it for now. But mostly he seems okay. Ken eventually is like, okay, here's what I'm really here. I want to bury the hatchet. I want you to come with me down to my cabin in San Diego. We're in Los Angeles. Let's get out of town for a little bit. Jim protest. I told my wife I'd take her out to dinner. He's like, that's easy. Just call her and tell her you're working late tonight. Just say you're working late so she doesn't worry about you. And that way you could come out with me. Like, yeah, you're not supposed to be doing this, so you should just lie. But it's a harmless lie. Just tell her that. Jim's like, all right, I'm going to come with you. But he forgets to call, and he doesn't do that right away. They get down to the car, and of course, Ken Franklin's like, I forgot my lighter. He goes back up to the office, and he's like, I'm going to just go get that. You just stay here in the car. He goes up, and this is where things become pretty quickly. Not all is as it seems. He begins trashing the office, and he puts a piece of paper that he just actually had Jim Ferris grab and say,
that was real slick. He's like, yes. Oh, this is just this paper. Oh, that was the wrong paper. Sorry. Well, now your fingerprints are on it. Isn't that nice?
Yep. And he puts that in his office, and he walks down, and he takes him to San Diego. At that point, Jim Ferris is like, oh, my wife is going to be worried about... Actually, this is another sly thing. Ken is like, I bet you're thinking about your wife, aren't you? Because he seems to want him to make this call. wants him to call his wife and say that you're in the office. So he is applying the pressure. Jim, still not seeing it coming, says, you know what? You're right. I'm just going to do this. And that way we can start having some fun. As he's on the phone saying, yep, I'm at the office. I'm working late. We now see Ken Franklin's face. The mask is off. He's a bad guy. He's angry. He puts on his gloves, pulls out a gun, turns around and shoots him. And we have the murder.
Yeah. And there's a couple other interesting things happening there. When they're driving to this cabin, we have this moment where Jim says, I'm getting like deja vu for some reason. That's the most important foreshadowing for how Columbo is going to actually solve this case. We're also introduced to Lily, who owns this kind of convenience store, who unfortunately is perhaps too stupid to live. But Lily's got a bit of a crush on Ken Franklin. But what really stands out to me in these opening scenes is just how good Jack Cassidy, who plays Ken Franklin, is. He's charismatic, and it's in this way where you absolutely believe that this man would murder his best friend if it suited him. Cassidy is prolific in Columbo. He comes back a couple times to play more murderers. We're going to see him again. He is the Columbo murderer, but this is probably still his best outing.
And I mean, and a lot of things are happening here. You mentioned some other examples. There was Columbo before this episode of Columbo, but in a lot of ways, this defines what Columbo is going to be going forward. You're going to have murderers like Jack Cassidy, like Ken Franklin, that, you know, they are going to give you their emotion on their faces, and then they're going to be, they are going to ham it up when it is time to be like, I am being charismatic, but it's believable enough. This guy behaves this way, and so people aren't off put by it because it's like, no, this seems right, and you need that kind of like strong acting there, and then of course you need that direction that Spielberg really brought to it, and then eventually you're going to need everything that Columbo brings to this episode, which is just, so spot on in terms of putting the killer off guard, and then how Columbo plays off of that. We'll get to a lot of that here in a second.
Right.
So we come back from commercial, and at this point, the wife who heard the gunshot on the phone call has called the police, and they are asking her, hey, well, you know, what's going on? And she is overwhelmed by these police questions. She is freaking out, and she needs to get out. And she goes down the hallway. As she's like, you know, calming down, in comes Lieutenant Detective Columbo, who is not going to pressure her anymore, not going to ask her a bunch more questions. Instead, he is going to fucking turn on the charm offensive and just be like, I am the coolest man you ever met. Let's get you home. You need to like rest. No more questions from these fool cops. I'm just going to get you out of here. I think you've been through enough. Of course.
Great intro.
He gets there. He takes her home, and he goes in with her. And then all of a sudden, he's making her an omelet. And it's a really good scene. It's a strong scene that shows that, like, Columbo, because of who he is, and this is a short, scruffy looking cop, schlub, unassuming. Part of that is he has access to a lot of places because, one, he's a cop, and two, people don't feel threatened by him. And that is established so strongly here. And then suddenly he's just probing. He's just asking questions, and they are questions that anyone could think to ask, but he actually does. And that people just start talking, and then he starts thinking. And we see that happen here in this scene. Anything stick out to you about this?
Just how this Columbo character is nailed immediately here. And of course, there's probably a bit more formulating happening in those pilots and whatnot, but man, like, he jumps into this frame of this episode, and that is the fully formed character. That is the Columbo we are going to know throughout the rest of this series that's going to run, into the 90s, yep. Right?
Yes.
Stuff like that. He is unassuming is a great way of putting it, but he is also compassionate. He is also self-deprecating. Immediately talks about how awful he is at cooking. He's bringing up his wife, who he never sees. That's always that's a TV trick that always gets me. I like it when Cheers does it. I like it when Frasier does it. I like it when Columbo does it. The never seen wife bit.
It's clever because you get to fill in whatever gaps you want. You could even is it even real? It doesn't matter. Like all that stuff. What matters is how those characters use their references to their wife, and that's very true for him.
3,000 patrons will watch Mrs. Columbo. Starring Kate Mulgrew from Star Trek Voyager.
That's right. God, I do.
That's
I
real.
About that.
That's
a
real thing. They made it not canon very quickly, but it was in fact a real thing here.
All right, we'll try to pick up the pace a little bit here because obviously the wife calls Ken Franklin, who called her actually earlier in the day, and say, "Hey, I buried the hatchet with Jim. Everything's good, but here's my number in case you need it." She calls him, says, "Hey, please get up here." So he drives back from San Diego with, I'm pretty sure, the body of Jim Ferris in his trunk, and shows up at her house.
Yeah, he must.
Yeah. When that happened, I'm like, that's in there, and I'm like, man, that's bold, but that's the audacity. And he walks into the house and talks to her, and then he closes the door, and there's Columbo, and he's just like, "Take it easy, calm down." Like I'm sure everything's gonna be fine. And then Columbo's like, "Hey, I'm just Columboing over here," and then Franklin's like, "What's going on here?" And then Columbo presents himself as a schlub, and you could almost see the gears turn in Jack Cassidy's head, where he's like, "Oh, sweet, thank you, Jesus. I got an idiot on my hands. I am going to be able to pull this off exactly how I thought." And
he's condescending, and because of that, he basically, this is a classic Columbo trap. So many of the killers are going to do in the future. They just kind of overshare with Columbo because, again, they don't see him as a threat, and they see him as somebody that they can manipulate. It's great because, we know better. At this point, maybe you don't. Columbo is so clearly the one manipulating, playing along when Ken is talking about their Mrs. Melville, their character, like, "Oh, well, this Mrs. Melville would have saw us by now." So many cops would have been like, "Why don't you actually shut up?" But by the way, you're a suspect, right? Not Columbo. He kind of takes it as like, "Oh yeah, well, I can take all the help I can get. Oh, that's really interesting, actually."
Yeah, he just lets them talk. Yeah, he lets them talk. And of course, by now, he's gotten a few tidbits of information. For example, that the wife believes, and rightfully so, and there's no reason for Columbo to doubt it, that the real author of the books was always Jim, and Ken Franklin never really had much to do with the writing. They came up with the character originally, but he hasn't written a word of these books in years. He's done some publicity. He's led up to his into the bargain in some other ways. But Jim recently told him they want to split. He wants to split and write his own books. He wants to do different kinds of books. Doesn't want to do the Melville mystery novels anymore, and especially not with Ken. And that was why they were breaking up, and that was the whole fight this entire time. And Columbo's like, "Oh, okay, that's an important piece of information." And he even says, like, what if people found out that Ken didn't write those books? That could bruise his ego. Like, he's searching for a motive, but you could tell even then, like, Columbo's like, that's not enough. It's not enough,
but you can also tell Columbo's like, I think it's him.
Yes.
The character kind of assessment he does once he meets him, I'm sure, just solidifies that for him.
Right, and then everything you said about letting them talk, well, that is exactly what's going to happen now. Ken Franklin thinks he's got, this idiot on the hook. He is going to reel him in by taking him to the office and explaining his theory as a famous murder novelist himself about what he thinks happened here. And let's look through the office. Here's a list of names of all of the organized crime bosses on the West Coast, and it's got his fingerprints on it. It's got mine on there too. We work together, of course. It's got both our fingerprints on it, but it's got Jim's on it. And
pretty good. It's pretty good plan.
And he was doing an investigation on all these things, and he was going to do a major expose. So obviously, one of these men had him killed. And Columbo does what he does. Like, "Oh, you say so, huh? Oh, you think so?" And it's great stuff, but it's like he's letting them set it up, and it's like, okay, when someone is giving you this much information, it's almost impossible. That's like, no, they want you to think this for some reason.
Another classic Columbo killer pitfall: just helping too much, helping a suspicious amount, right?
Yep, exactly. Now, if this is your first time watching Columbo, you're like, okay, how much of this is he going to buy? Well, here's a good hint that he's not. He gives us our first one more thing, which is going to be, we'll try to cover every one more thing in these episodes going forward. But our first one is he questions why Franklin didn't fly back instead of driving. It's a very small thing. But he's like,
it is small. And I almost buy Franklin's thing, like, well, with with getting to the airport, it's almost the same time, blah, blah, blah. He wants his car there. You can almost be like, yeah, maybe, sure.
Yep. And it's like, it's such a small thing that you could tell Franklin's like, I answered that pretty well. He had a question that is fair, but I gave an answer that like makes a lot of sense. I was in a rush. I wasn't thinking. And even if when I did consider a plane, well, that's, not really going to be something that I'm actually going to choose in the moment. So he's not worried. And Columbo doesn't have a lot to go on, but Columbo's not done asking questions. We get another one more thing in the next scene where I'm sorry, actually, no, I got mixed up here. Franklin realizes he made a significant amount of, this is not the significant mistake, but there is one coming up. Franklin gets a little bit desperate later when he needs to eliminate the witness. Mike, you mentioned her early. Leela Selanka?
LaRocca from the Rock. Yeah, it's like LaRocca's Grocers or something.
Yes.
Like that. This girl who has this big crush on
Lysenko. Miss Lysenko. Yes.
Lysenko, that's it. A big crush on Ken. And, one of the sloppier moments of that murder was when Ken drove up to this convenience store. One
of his moments to create an alibi, of course.
Right. And Jim is in the car. And it's important for Lily to think that Ken's going to be at his cabin alone.
He wants everyone to think he's alone. He calls Lily. This is when he calls the wife and says, "Hey, I'm coming down here alone."
Right. But Lily, who has this crush on Ken and is more curious just to see if he's going with a woman because she's jealous, peeks and sees Jim there. So she knows that Jim is with Ken, and she also knows that everybody else seems to think that somehow Jim was murdered in his office, which can't possibly be true, and she's the only person who knows that. And this idiot tells Ken that she knows this.
Well, because deep down she knows he's a good guy. Deep down she knows that he wants to, and that, if she explains herself, she can get a little something out of this. And what does she want? $15,000 and a little bit of that sweet dick. A little bit of that sweet dick.
That's not even really what she wants. Yeah. It is, and it's pointed out later, kind of a comically low amount to ask for blackmailing a murderer.
A rich and famous murderer, yes.
Right, but she's just going about this incredibly stupidly. Nobody else knows, so there's absolutely no reason for Ken to not just try to dispose of her, because if he does that, he's already killed somebody, so whatever. He clearly has no moral qualms about that. Well, kill her, and then now, once again, nobody actually knows. Everything is great. Everything's hunky-dory.
Right, so his plan to kill her is, okay, I'm going to drive down there, but first he does have another run-in with Columbo before he drives down there.
I love it, because this is such a great thing in Columbo, is seeing the relationship between Columbo and the killer evolve through the episode.
Yes,
because at first they're like, the killer has to pretend to be so shocked by the murder, and they're in mourning, and they're like, oh yes, I bought, and they are helpful. They're very helpful, and then they kind of act friendly towards Columbo as the days progress, and then that slowly turns into this annoyance and even anger by the end, and we have that full arc here.
Yes, so there is he is put Ken's in this corner. He does have to do something with this, but Columbo is waiting for Franklin before he leaves, and he interrogates him. Excuse me, I'm getting out of order again. There was another one more thing here that I'm trying to place. I can't remember. Remember he was waiting. I think he was this when the interview was happening with the hot interviewer, and he's like,
he was clearly we should have another talk sometime, right?
Exactly, right. And it's he has already clearly moved on from all this. He thinks he's already won. He thinks he's in the clear, and so Columbo showing up and being like, hey, we are I do have some more questions. Ken Franklin's like, oh man, I am annoyed by this. This is I don't want to be dealing with this, until Columbo says, I just thought you would want an update on what happened to your friend. And then you could see Ken Franklin remember, oh, I'm supposed to be concerned. Shit. I'm supposed to be, that's where I'm supposed to be. So he goes, oh, yes, of course, officer, tell me what's going on. And then Columbo's like, I did what you told me. I contacted all of those heads of all of those organized crimes, and they said what you said they would say, and that they never even heard of Jim Ferris. And then Ken Franklin's like, it's as I suspected. Of course, that's what they would say. And it's like, you can see how he thinks this is such a perfect thing.
Right, so proud of himself.
But he wants to get out of there, and then he goes down and he has to kill this girl. And his plot to kill the girl is, I am going to wine and dine her, and then I'm going to ask her if she wants to go to the center of a lake alone with me at night.
And even she is like, well, no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, and she even says, like, I don't know if I can trust you. You killed a man. It's like, wow, that's really good thinking, lady. Good thinking.
Shouldn't
yeah.
invite this man to your home by yourself. That's also dangerous, to be clear. But you can see at this point he's just frustrated and desperate. It's like, screw it. I'll just kill her now.
Yes. So he, she is like, okay, we're getting along. I'm gonna go look at my money and enjoy looking at this money. $15,000. I've never seen this much money before, all at one time. And he is wrapping up one of the champagne bottles he brought in a cloth. Excuse me. And he comes up behind her, and as he's about to hit her, she turns around, and we get a Spielberg face, something that Spielberg is known for.
Yeah.
Instead of showing the action, instead of showing like a clunky prop bottle breaking over someone's head, we see the horror in her face as she gets attacked and knows that she's going to die. And it's very effective. And you don't
hear the scream. You see the scream. And in general, you know me, I appreciate this about Columbo. Even though it's obviously a show about people getting murdered, it's rarely ever, if ever, gratuitous. They don't need to show us a woman getting bludgeoned to death. They don't need to show us, vicious, bloody murders or things like that, which would very much be the kind of way we would go with this sort of thing today, I'm sure. And this isn't me trying to be like, today everything's so violent. But there is something about this that I do just kind of feel better about, that is just a little bit easier for me to watch.
Yes. His plot this time, though, is now that he's knocked her out, he's probably killed her. I don't know. But he is going to take her back out on that boat like he originally suggested to her, and take the little rowboat. He capsizes it by shaking it, and he puts her in the water and has her sink to the bottom of the water. And he hides the bottle that he broke, which Columbo actually saw that bottle at his house. But he does a good job of making sure it sinks to the bottom of the lake. No one's probably going to find that. Leading up to this, I did remember the other one more thing, which was the mail. When he called Columbo and said, "Get over here," it's because the body was in the front yard. He found Jim Ferris's body in his front yard as a warning. A quote warning from these the gangsters or whatever,
from the West Coast mobsters, because
they wouldn't know. This is actually pretty clever that he thought about, like, they wouldn't know that we were breaking up, so the mobsters would assume that I was working on the book with him. And it's like that's pretty good that you thought that deep. But Columbo is looking around. He's not. As always, he's humoring the murderer. He's humoring them as they explain what they want him to think. He's being a little bit more, he's looking a little bit deeper than that, and he sees today's mail opened up on his counter next to the phone that he obviously used to call Columbo to come look at the body. And Columbo says, it's weird how people are different. Had I found a body in my yard, I would never have even thought to open my mail. And the guy's like, I was just doing it to distract myself. And Columbo goes, yeah, bills, they're very distracting. And you got like, no, they're not. That's like the least distracting thing in the world.
Right. And this is
the
Columbo
first crack.
And this is Columbo also kind of letting on a bit more. Like,
yes.
I am on to you.
I want you to feel that pressure a little bit because you might make more mistakes. And this is definitely Ken Franklin realizing this is a real mistake. It's not evidence, but it's definitely something that's going to put him off. And that is what this hunt is always about. Like, Columbo applies a little bit of pressure, and it causes maybe sometimes an overreaction from the killer. Now, of course, this killer has bigger things going on because there's the big plot twist of Lysenko actually witnessing the murder, and he deals with that. Obviously, people are like, "Oh, Miss Lysenko is missing. She's dead. They found the body or whatever." Columbo comes down, and he's actually waiting at the house for Ken Franklin when Ken Franklin returns from pretending to go fishing, so he could be seen being like, "Look at me, I'm just gonna go fishing.
Look at me, I'm the most fishy son of a bitch you've ever seen."
He really is, and that's really good. Columbo's waiting for him at his house, and the guy's like, "Holy what the fuck are you doing here?" But he's like,
yeah, that's when he's just annoyed. I love Columbo. Like the excuse for him being there is just so silly. He's like, "Oh yeah, I don't know. I thought maybe I'd buy a house over here. We could be neighbors."
Yes, exactly. It's so this is actually one of the best scenes in the movie, or in the TV movie in the show.
Practically, it's a movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is. How he's really going to begin catching him. So he says, I'm going to buy a house. I want to like rent a house in your neighborhood. Bring my wife down here. Do you have any recommendations? And Ken Franklin's annoyed because he's like, I know you are here for an ulterior motive. You're not really here for that. And then Columbo's like, no, this is what I'm here for. But since you brought it up, what happened? What happened with the sink out there? What's going on there? And did you know her? And he's like, well, not really. And then eventually he's like, I kind of did know her. So Columbo pushes on this a little bit, but he's only pushing a little bit. And eventually he stops asking about it. And Ken Franklin's like, I did a good job again. I answered all his questions satisfactorily. I am a really good murderer.
Just the best.
And so when Columbo begins asking about the house again and renting the place, Ken Franklin lightens up. He lets his guard down. It's like, you know what? We're good. We are buddies. We are buddies. This is the guy that's going to help me.
Best friends.
This is the guy that's going to help me get away with murder. So when Columbo's like, what's it like out here? And what's the nightlife? Anything to do at night? People go out and like, where can I party? It's kind of, I think, what Columbo says. Yeah. And Ken Franklin's like, no, there's no partying. There's nothing to do out here at night. It's all sleeping and crickets. And Columbo goes, that's funny. Because I didn't want to barge in on you. And Franklin said, what do you mean? And he said, well, I called you last night to tell you I was going to come visit you today. And nobody answered at night.
Oh, it's so good.
And Ken Franklin basically looks at the camera and goes, uh-oh. It owns. It's such a good scene. That is the kind of like rewarding setup and knock out of the park that you're going to get from Columbo over and over. And that this is one of the best examples of it.
Absolutely.
So then it's like, okay, we can like get to like what's gonna actually wrap all this up here. So what has Columbo actually discovered up to this point? Well, he knows that actually, and he tells a lot of this to the murder victim's wife. Like he discovered that Ken took out $15,000, the money that he was going to pay to the witness, and then he put it back in the bank the next day. And this all lines up with when the girl is killed. He also has discovered that Ken has a $250,000 life insurance if Jim were to die.
Heck of a motive.
There's your motive.
He's got this big falutin high living style. He's got these 2 houses. He loves to go to the shows. He's got all these women. How's he gonna afford this?
Yep. And he also discovers that, hey, Ken knew Lily very well because he gave her a signed copy of his book.
Yeah,
and that seems to be like they're much more of a relationship to the point where maybe he could show up at her house or come to her house, and it wouldn't be awkward.
That's catching him in the biggest lie so far, like just provable lie.
Yep. And then, of course, he's known for a long time that Ken never actually wrote any of the books. So there's a lot of circumstantial evidence there. The big reveal, the big conclusion to how he actually solves this case, though, is he is at the office where Ken and Jim were working, as Ken Franklin is like, I'm moving on with all this. I forget, he's gonna go on some trip or something. I think he's trying to like sell the office, whatever. He's trying to move on with his life. And yet again, here's Columbo waiting for him when he least expects it.
Columbo.
Yes,
he's like so unhappy.
He is done. He is over with it. He is no longer best friends with this guy. He wants to move on. He's like, I never want to see Columbo again. And Columbo's like, man, chill out. Like I'm just like hanging out in here, and I just don't touch anything because I am 100% investigating this entire room. And he lays it out for him. He's like, oh, I'm arresting you for the murder. And the guy's like, on what? And it's like, he's gonna go through each step of all the things we just said. You knew Lily. $15,000, $250,000 life insurance thing, and he's like, yeah, none of that proves anything. None of that is hard proof. He's like, you don't have any hard proof. And he's like, you're right. Until we searched this room. And I discovered that, hey, all throughout his life, Jim was writing down notes of ideas for how to kill someone. And what I noticed is there were, in the 2 murders here, one was clever and the other one was really sloppy. The first one, when you killed Jim, that was clever. The other one was sloppy, and that was your idea. The original idea had to be Jim's, so it had to be written down somewhere because he writes down all his ideas because it's too clever for you because you've never written a word of any of these mystery novels. So it's too clever. So I bet if I go in that office, I'm going to find the evidence of that murder being written down in Jim's handwriting. So it had to have happened before he died, and you stole that, and that's what you used to kill him. And he finds the note, he presents it to him, and Ken Franklin just sits there and he's like, man, I had you going for a while though, didn't I?
Yeah, he smiles. He says it.
Yep. And Columbo's like, yeah, you did. Like you were, I never thought I was going to get you. And until I saw that, Mike, I think these days that sort of evidence, I think wouldn't go very far in a real courtroom, but boy, it's pretty satisfying in this show, huh?
It is. And, maybe there's enough stuff here that I'm sure it'll stack up, but he does also kind of get a confessional pretty much from Ken at the end here because Ken's pride has to butt in. He has to say, actually, that was my idea. The only good idea I ever had. I can't believe he wrote it down. He never thought he wrote it down or else he would have done it. But this is, again, going back to the beginning. This is why Jim said this is deja vu, because he knows this murder. This murder was a book idea presented to him years ago.
Yeah, years ago. And Ken says, I must have told it to him 5 years ago. I just never thought the idiot would write it down.
The idiot would write down. Still that venom. Still no more. It's not sad to see the guy go.
Oh, not at all. It's it's all great acting till the very end of this episode. It's great stuff.
And then just the end with him still Columbo leaving, reading the end of a Mrs. novel as he's walking out of the room, stops to look at the portrait of this fictional character, right?
Yep.
Then leaves. Just great.
That's how the episode ends. Stuff. It is. It really is one of the best TV episodes ever made. It's the visual storytelling, the great acting, the connecting each act together with the foreshadowing and bringing back each actor's performance in a big way by having Lysenko be a big part in the second act and having that murder be necessary and the contrast of how clever the murders are, all that stuff really well done. And for me, it is always going to be about that hunt, and anytime Columbo puts someone on their heels and how he gets them to their heels and then what he like pounces on with them at that point, it is always satisfying every single time, and it's definitely had some of its best in this episode.
No, exactly. I mean, this really does give them the blueprint to go for dozens of episodes over the course of decades. It's really all right there.
So this is a first of I think there's literally 69 episodes. Nice.
Nice.
They're going to do this a lot, but going forward, what do you look forward to as we rewatch these? Because for me, it's the easy thing is the guest stars. I mean, when we're gonna get Spock and stuff like that. It's like
Spock, Leonard Nimoy's in probably my favorite episode.
Well, I mean, he's probably the most fun killer, I think. So it's like
that one's interesting. Like, I don't want to spoil too much there, but there's almost like something likable about some of the killers, nothing likable about Leonard Nimoy's.
Yeah, but part of that makes it like that's what's most interesting because it's just like we don't usually see a killer like that, and Leonard Nimoy chews it up. It's good, but like there's a dozen or so great guest stars like that, and then every episode usually has at least one fun thing. Of course, it goes into like Mike said, the 90s. The show is not as good then. Well, it's still fun in a lot of ways, and I still enjoy it, especially when it's like early internet stuff gets involved. It's like such a weird time capsule.
Goes into the 2000s. There's the last episode, Columbo Likes the Nightlife, 2003.
Yes, it's
just nuts.
I think I did watch that episode too, and it's bizarre and cool in a lot of ways, especially starting Prescription Murder because Columbo is so young in that. Like he looks so fresh-faced, actually.
He doesn't look quite as schlubby there.
Yes, they definitely let him go more schlub in this. Any final thoughts, Mike?
No, just that, this is now the second time I've seen this episode again.
Same.
Probably about a year ago when I watched this, and it kind of started me on Columbo and a character I had heard about, especially back when I would watch Monk. People said, "Oh, Monk was kind of the modern Columbo, right?" And then watching Columbo, like, "Oh, this is much better." Actually, this is fantastic. This is a timeless character. A lot of things from the early 70s don't feel super timeless, but Columbo, he is just like a warm hug. Just love that man.
Yep.
Hope he investigates my murder someday.
Yeah, that's the dream. And, you know,
when you kill me because of, jealousy.
Oh, yeah,
we try to split up.
When everyone finds that you've been the game mess all along. Yeah. I never did a word. I did never say any work.
You're just a pretty face.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a really good episode, really good show, incredible character. Peter Falk really became one of my favorites the instant. I always liked Princess Bride and stuff like that. But seeing this, I'm like, oh, I get why Peter Falk was in the public consciousness in such a way because of this. All right, that's going to do it for the first episode of Columbros. We'll be back in a month with episode 2. Mike, do we know what that one's called?
Episode 2 will be Death Lends a Hand. Ooh.
I am excited. So if you want to watch along, just make sure you watch that by, let's say, September 10th-ish, in that range, by the first week of September. That'll be a good way. And then if you're a Patreon member, you can listen to us right along. And if you want to wait, of course, you can wait for the ad-supported version later on your podcast feeds.
Robert Culp, let's go.
Until next time, have a good one. Take care of yourself. We got to come up with a good Columbo thing. One more thing next episode.
One more. Yeah, we'll work on that, everybody.
It's no good, but we'll come up with something better. Until then, goodbye.